All right, so now we get to the heart of it, human anatomy. Okay, so we're going to cover human anatomy. I'm not going to go through and describe what each one of these are, but basically these are general definitions of, they're general ways of describing different things on the body. Okay, so for instance, if something's lateral, that means it's towards the outside as opposed to medial, which is towards the inside. So sometimes you'll hear, like in a sport, that they tore their MCL or their ACL. So if they say the ACL, that's the anterior cruciated ligament. Okay, so anterior means to the front, which I think I got somewhere in here. Anterior, referring to the front. Okay, so the front of the knee. Cruciated means it crisscrosses. I don't actually have that one in here, but that's what the cruciated means. And then ligament, which means bone to bone. Okay, so that's bone to bone attachment as opposed to tendon, which is bone to muscle attachment. All right, but you'll see that a lot of these things here, they're used to describe certain things in anatomy, and sometimes they're part of they're part of what the thing is. Like a ramus, right? You have the ramus of the mandible. It's a flattened part of the bone. It's basically the part that creates the L shape, from your jaw into your skull. Okay, but I'm not going to go through all these. I just want you to realize that as you're looking through them, you might be like, oh, I remember that term was in another thing, and then you'll be like, oh, that always means it's toward, that it's a bony projection, right? Or like a process or something, right? Or a protuberance, which is like the occipital protuberance. Those are things that stick out. Okay, so measurements. Now, obviously, I'm going to talk about things, and they're going to be generalized because every person's different. You know what I mean? Some people are tall and have like whatever, and some people are short, and some people are wide, and there's variation. This is just meant to be more middle of the road. If you actually look at some measurements, you'll see that, like, if you look at like comics, the measurements are not, they're not this, okay? If you look at fashion design, their measurements are like, the person's like 8.5 heads or something. It's like ridiculous, because they look ridiculous. That's just how they do their thing. So everyone's got their own. This is more meant to be anatomically correct. But some general things that you can kind of gauge is that the head and trunk together, so from the head to the trunk, which basically means at the end of the giblets here, that is 4 heads tall. From the bottom of the foot to the femur, which is right here, would be 4 heads. Okay, so right here, so femur is this bone here. Let me see. The great trochanter is halfway down the figure, so that's this. Across the shoulders is 2 heads, so meaning that if you took the head and turned it sideways, it'd be 2 heads across. The femur is approximately 2 heads long, so basically from your hip down to your knee. And from the knee joint to the bottom of the foot is also about 2 heads. All right. So, because that'd be the tibia and the tarsals and calcaneus and all that. So that those together equal what this is alone, which is actually kind of the same with the arm here. So if you take from your top of your humerus to the base of humerus, if you bend your arm around, if you make a fist, your knuckles, right? So the end of your carpals, your metacarpals, okay, will touch where this is, and then your phalanges, which your fingers would be beyond. So it's kind of similar in that regard. Anyway, and if you take your knee and you bend it up, it should touch your shoulder. Just so you know, some other things. Okay, so types of joints. Basically, we can describe joints by the way that they articulate. Okay, so one is unmovable. So those are basically joints that don't actually articulate at all. So some obvious ones would be basically in your skull, right? In order for your head to grow. It doesn't grow a whole ton. It has these little dovetail-like joints. There's little wiggle waggles in between, but they're not meant to be flexible in any way. It's just that when you first, are being born, you have those things. So you have like they're called sutures. Yeah. So they're called sutures. So you have like the parietal suture and the temporal suture, and the frontal. And if you've ever had a baby, you'll see that where this frontal bone meets your parietal bones, because there's you can't see it here, but on either side of your head. There's one that runs right down the center here, and then the frontal is just one large piece in the front. There's always this little, like, because it's 3 pieces touching, there's a little soft spot on babies, and like you can even see their heartbeat. It's really creepy. Don't push on it. Cartilaginous. I don't think I said that right. Basically, it means that you have bones that are attached through cartilage, and so an example of that would be like the ribs. Basically, if you look your ribs, what we call the true ribs, well, I guess also the floating, the false ribs. Well, not the floating ribs, but the true ribs and the false ribs are basically the ones that they attach to your sternum here and the manubrium here by cartilage. Okay, and so there's a slight flexibility. If you've ever seen someone or knew somebody that like had like a rib injury or something, they might like get this injured, and it takes a really long time to heal. Slightly movable, the fibrocartilaginous. Basically, you know, the discs in between your vertebrae are a good example of that. So you can kind of move them. They don't move a lot; they move a little. Freely movable. Of the freely movable joints, we have the hinge, which would be like your elbow or your knee, right? So it goes in one direction; it doesn't go any other direction. It just goes in the one axis. You can what we call abduct, or I'm sorry, you can flex, which is pulling it towards your body, or you can extension, flexion and extension. So extension means putting your arm out. Flexion would mean pulling your arm in. But those are hinge joints. A pivot joint, which is just a cylindrical form on an axis, would be basically your this bone here. So you have your ulna, which is if you look at your arm, it's the one that allows you. It's this guy right here. It's basically when you fall, that would be the part that you would hit on your elbow. The Acromion process, but which is part of it. That's this. The radius is this part. If you actually rotate your wrist, you'll notice that your wrist doesn't rotate, right? It's the ulna and radius. And in fact, it's actually the radius. The radius allows you to rotate. Oh, this is another example. It allows you to rotate your wrist over. The wrist itself can't roll. It can only go up and down and left and right, but it can't actually roll. It's this joint, in fact, that allows you to do that. Ball and socket, which would be basically like the acetabulum in your hip, right? So this is meant to be the pelvis, and this is meant to be the greater trochanter of the femur. That goes in there, right? And that's a really tight one. A really loose one would be more like your shoulder. Okay. Okay. So plane, gliding face to face with retaining ligaments. That's basically your carpals. If you look at your wrist, right, it doesn't bend at any specific. It bends over a large area, kind of almost like these here, but basically allows them to slide across each other. It's a very kind of loose joint. Saddle joint increases the extent of the hinge movement. So the thumb here, it allows it to wiggle a little bit left and right and up and down. It can basically rotate. It can't really roll, but it can rotate in those other ones. If you look at your other one, these ones don't do that quite as much as your thumb. The ellipsoid, carpals to the ulnar radius. So basically, ellipsoid is a modified ball and socket. It means it doesn't have quite the range. You know, your wrist you can move around a little bit, but it's somewhat restricted. Your up and down is better than your side to side. Your side to side is pretty limited. And obviously, there's also no roll also available in that. All right, so let's talk about the human skeleton. Now that we've done that, you can hang on. All right, so yeah, we're gonna cover the human skeleton. This is a neat little thing. If you click on this, yeah, you can agree. Wait for it to load. Basically allows you to like select parts, and then you can oh, that doesn't have extension. Hang on a second. Let's do this one. Let's see. Abduction, adduction. You can go like that. Woo! If you want to do the dance. Oh wait, we could do the floss or whatever you guys, right? The floss is now what it's called. Woo! Oh no, it doesn't go too far. Okay, but allows you, and I think you can. I thought you could rotate the guy. Let me see. Oh, okay. Wow. Anyway, this is a neat little. Well, that doesn't help. Let me see. Spin. Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. So you can rotate them. But it's a neat little app that you can look at. I don't know. If you're trying to find a position of something, or you want to see what the anatomy looks like at certain positions, you can try to play around with that. Now, the other thing I did in here is if you click on this, you can see these 3D models. I just embedded them right into it. Hopefully it works on your computer. It shouldn't take any special software. As long as you have, you know, as long as your browser is updated, it should allow it to work. The only thing I would say is that it might be a little slow. So you can see mine's a little bit slow, still loading up. There we go. Now it's a little bit faster. Okay, so we're going to talk about the axial skeleton. Basically, axial skeleton is everything that's the trunk of the person. So not your appendicular skeleton, not your limbs. So not your arms, not your legs. I think technically also not your hips, but I usually just consider that the pelvis. I consider it part of the axial just because it's all part of the same business here. So here we have the skull. So some main features of the skull is that you have the maxilla. That's the top part of the mouth here. Okay. You have the mandible. That's the jaw. You have the frontal bone, which is this. Like if you headbutt somebody, that's what you hit. Parietal is the side here. The occipital is the back here. The temporal is this part right here. Think your temple, right? Makes sense. Zygomatic, this is the zygomatic bone, this guy right here. The nasal bones are in the nose. Lacrimal is this little bone in here. A lot of times we'll say the nasolacrimal canal. That is, you know how when you cry, there's a little hole there, and it goes through and down your nose, and that's why you snot when you cry. And the sphenoid is also inside of here, and as is the ethmoid. They're just all that. You see all the gobbledygook on the inside there of the nose. It's all that business. So some features. When I say features, basically I mean the things that kind of stick out and that are important. So the mastoid process is basically, it's this part here. So if you feel under your ears, like behind your ears and under them, you'll feel a bump, right? Kind of back and behind. That's the mastoid process, all right? The occipital protuberance is if you feel the back of your head, you'll feel there's a little bit bump. At the very base before it becomes your neck, there's a little bump, and that's the occipital protuberance. Zygomatic arch is obviously where the zygomatic bone is. That's your cheekbone. The auditory canal is the hole right here. And the mental protuberance is basically your chin, the little butt of your chin, okay? So some things with this. The skull has 22 bones. I don't really care about any of that. The main things probably to know are these, just because these are what we call bony landmarks, which means that they stick out, that you can see them no matter the figure, okay? A couple of things that you might notice is that the head's not actually an egg shape. There's no perfect circles in the body. Typically what you're going to see is that the head is one head tall, no doughy. It's 7/8 head deep. Okay, so it means it's almost, when you turn it to the side, it's almost a square, okay? And if you remember, if you cut a head in half horizontally, you will see that's where the eye line is, okay? That's also where the auditory canal should be, roughly, okay? Probably a little bit lower, I guess. Yeah, it's a little bit low. But basically, that's typically, and if you cut the head halfway this way, that's typically kind of where that general area is. And so when you draw your jawline across, it comes up just before the auditory canal, right? Which is where your ear would be, right? And ear would be right here. Okay. So be aware of the eminences. So eminences are basically, all it really means is it's peaks. It's where things stick out a little bit more than others. So typically in a skull here, if I go up here, you'll see there's like an eminence here and an eminence here. Notice that the face is very much planar, meaning that, and if I go up, well, see, he doesn't have a very pointy head. Some of them, they have a real strong, like where the parietal suture is here. This will be really strong, and you'll get this almost kind of pointed. If you feel the top of your head, you'll feel that there's a point to it towards the top. That's where the two sutures meet up, but that's an eminence, okay? So basically, you can see like here's an eminence, eminence, eminence. Look for angular areas when you're modeling stuff, because if you just if you draw or form things roundly, they don't have a lot of structure. So you're always looking for where you can kind of have lines. Yeah, the front of the skull is flat. Kind of want to mention that. Obviously, the nose would stick out beyond this flatness. The face is 5 eyes wide, meaning that there's about 1 eye width from the outside of the head to where the eye is, and there's about 1 eye width between this eye and this eye, so right between. Now, obviously, some people, I'm sure you know, some of them, their eyes are very close, and then some people are very far away. So there's a little bit of a variety in there. The nose line, it lies about 1/3 down the midline. So, so if this is the middle, you go about 1/3 of that. So if you break this from the middle here to the bottom here, break it down to 1/3, that's where the nose is. And then at 2/3 is where the mouth is. Okay. All right. There's that. The vertebral column. So basically you have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. All right. So some things about that is, the cervical are your neck. That's your neck bones. All right. So basically, that's what happens before it goes into your chest. Now, the top one's called the atlas. It's like Atlas, like the god guy, because it holds the head up. The next one is the axis, and the reason why it's called the axis is because if you notice that you can turn your head quite a bit because the way that it's built. And let me turn this one on. Hopefully, it doesn't slow up my browser too much. I think this is a little bit simpler, hopefully. Okay, so let's go up. Let's see if I can get up here. So if you look, what you'll see is, so this one's going to hold the head, but if you look, this one, see how like there's like a thing sticking up? I don't know if you can kind of see it right here. So that allows your head to rotate, side to side a little bit more. Okay, and that's why it's called the axis. Then you have the vertebrae prominence, and that is your 7th cervical vertebrae. And, that's why I'm sideways here. So what you'll notice is, here's your vertebrae, and then see how there's one that sticks out more than the others? That's the 7th cervical. And if you feel the back of your neck, go down until you feel one bump larger, that's the 7th cervical. Okay. You'll notice it in animals too. In animals, that's where their withers would be. Basically, it's like a bulge, like where their shoulders meet up and the 7th cervical meet up. That's what that is, okay? So it's something you see. There's other reasons. One is it's a little bit larger than the other cervical vertebrae, but also the muscles of the trapezius do not wrap around it, okay? After that, we have the 12 thoracic. Notice that there's 12 thoracic, and you also have 12 ribs. So for each thoracic rib, or each thoracic vertebrae, you have a rib attaching at what we call transverse processes. So notice that the cervical ones don't have those, and then these thoracic vertebrae have them. That's these little wings here. That's where the ribs attach, okay? It's called the transverse process. These are called the spinous process, which is in the back, okay? So anyway, you have 12 of those. That's where most of your flexion comes from, as far as like, bending around and what have you. Okay, then after that's the 5 lumbar, and that's these big boys down here. Basically, this is usually when people have a problem with their back, it's usually one of these, like you slip a disc or something, because a lot of weight. And you'll notice too that as you go through, it gets bigger down here and it's thinner up here, because this is only supporting the head. And as heavy as the head is, it's only a head, right? Then right here, these are supporting like the shoulder, like maybe some shoulders a little bit, but this is supporting the entire upper. And as you have more things towards the top with leverage and stuff, it pushes more things onto this, okay? Then we have the sacrum, which is the 5 fused vertebrae. Basically, it's not on here, but basically it's the back of the pelvis. It kind of looks like vertebrae. And then you have the coccyx, which is the 3 to 5 vestigial. Basically, it's your tailbone is what that is, a little nipple on the end of your sacrum, okay? And you'll see those later on. So some things I want to point out is that your spine is kind of a nice S-curve, okay? And the reason why it's like that is because in order to absorb impact, it needs to be able to be like a jack, right? It needs to be able to allow pressure to be pushed down on it and then be able to flex, right? Because unlike other animals, we're the only animals that really have a spine like this. Other ones are more like C's, because we are upright. So in order to support that sort of that weight in a vertical manner, that's just how we're built, okay? So you always want to look for that S. S is like the line of beauty. It's a nice looking form. You want to make sure that you take advantage of it, okay? So don't make the back straight. Yeah, we did that. Artists, yeah. Okay. Also, there's typically planes. So most of the time you'll see it on the face as well, but there'll be an up plane, meaning it's sort of facing up. Then there'll be, this one has a vertical, then an up, and then a down. But usually they'll work in opposition. You'll have ones that face up, then down, then up, then down, okay? Most of the time you see that. So you can see the chest here is like that. All right. Yay. So the thorax, which is basically our ribs, right? Or the caustic region. All right. So we have 7 true ribs. True ribs means it's coming from the sternum to the spine, and has its own attachment. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it doesn't. Math's not right here. I can't rotate it. But you have 7 true ribs. You have 5 false ribs. Basically, a false rib are ribs that attach. They have their own attachment on the thoracic vertebrae, but they share attachment to the sternum. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I guess. But then these 5. See, I don't, wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. But if you look at these false ribs, they all have their own attachment on the back. Okay. They all attach. Well, you can't see the thing. But they share an attachment to the sternum. See how like these are all being attached? So that's why they're called false ribs. They're still ribs. And the floating ribs have no attachment. And that's just these 2 in the back. One of the things that people used to do is they used to, way back in like I think the 20s or something, they'd actually have these ribs removed so that they could, women would, so that they could have a more hourglass figure. But obviously that's really dangerous because those are basically there to protect your kidneys. So don't do that. But that's something that used to be done. Okay, so yeah, that's your ribs. Your sternum is this. It's made of the manubrium. That's this part here. Notice it looks like kind of like a tie. The manubrium is the knot of the tie. This is called the gladiolus. It's supposed to look like a gladius, like the sword, a gladius, and then on the end is the xiphoid process, which is like a little nipple on the end. Whenever somebody gets their, they have to have, what do you call it, CPR done, this is the part that always breaks off, that people are like, oh, you broke there, whatever. That's usually what they're talking about. Some other things too with this curvature I wanted to mention as well. Notice that the rib cage is facing this way. It's not straight up and down. It's actually angled back. I think this shows that. Not so much, but it should be slightly angled back. Oh, not like that. And also, it's if you look, you can see the ribs themselves. See how like the opening is actually kind of like down, like it's at an angle. Another thing too I want to make a point about is that if you look, it is not round. It actually has angles. Okay. So if you look at it from above, it should look something like this. So this would be the posterior where the spine is, and this would be the anterior where the sternum would be. Generally, it's more shaped like that, and you can kind of see it here, okay? And it is sort of an egg shape. It's thinner at the top and then wider at the bottom. You can kind of see it here as well. Oh, also with, well, yeah, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, that's that. Oh, some other things, too. So there are definitely differences between males and females. One of the things that you will sometimes see is that, or what I've seen before, is that female ribs will be more convexed, while men's will be more concaved. The reason being is obviously for protection. If you think about traditionally, women would protect the children, right, and protect that area. Well, men might go out and hunt, and so they need to be able to breathe better. But obviously they're also more disposable, right? So if you have a family structure and you have a male, female, and children, the male would probably be the first guy to go against whatever it was. But then if he died, then the female would be the next one to go up and, try to whatever. Because if the male's gone, the female can still carry on. You know what I mean? She can still produce more young. She can still do more things. The male's not as important. So guys, we don't matter. That's the moral of the story. So let me see. The rib cage is, yeah, all these heads. Notice that there's an arch. Another thing too. So you guys have probably seen there's a big thing. I just thought this was so funny. I read this article and I thought it was interesting. That they're always talking about like big behinds with women. There was this university did some research on this, and they found that what they believe is that it has nothing to do actually with the size of the bootay of females that men are. Or heterosexual men, I should say, find attractive. What it actually is, in fact, is part of the reason why we have this curvature of the back, like I said, because it helps us support weight. The more arch there is here, generally speaking, it would give the appearance that they would be more fertile, that they would be able to support a baby here better than if it wasn't as strong. And so it's not actually the butt that they're finding attractive. It's actually the illusion that the butt makes the back arch seem larger. I hope you understand what I'm saying. But basically, it makes this look or have an appearance of being more curved than what it actually is, and thusly also making it look like there's more of an arch, and then makes the female seem more fit for reproduction. I don't know. It was kind of an interesting thing because when they had larger behinds, but they weren't arched up, people didn't find them attractive, and then when they gave them smaller ones but arched, they did. So on and so forth. Anyway, yada yada yada. You see, there's that. Okay, so let's do the hips here. Okay, so the pelvic girdle basically is a collection of these bones. You have your ilium. The ilium are, let me turn this on. Ilium are your hips. It's this part here. It's when you put your hands on your hips, that's the part you touch. Okay, so you know, when I put my hand upon your hip and you dip, we dip, that is the hip. So that's this. This is the ilium. Okay, so this bone here is the ilium. Your ischium is the behind, right? So this is when you grab back here. This is the ischium. Pubic bone is basically, man, they didn't do any like cuts in there, so you can't really tell. The pubic bone is this part here, okay? So where the pubic area would be. Pubic symphysis is this, man, that's really cartoony. Is this soft cartilaginous mass in here. So for males, it's not that important, but for females, it is. And why do you think we would need that for females? So basically, you know, they say, oh, you got childbearing hips. That's a legit thing. What'll happen is that through chemicals, hormones, this will actually soften up and allow a female's hips to actually widen during childbirth to allow the baby to pass through. Okay, it's a particular problem for humans because our children have very large brains. If you compare them to other animals, the size of the brain is ridiculously terrible. And I remember once I thought it was really interesting because, you know, you'll see like a deer be born and it walks up in like an hour, right? And it's like, oh, I'm off, you know, or you'll see whatever and they're born and then they're ready to go. But you look at a human, and human babies are worthless. I mean, just in general, they're worthless. Just being a parent, I'll tell you that they're just terrible. But they're actually pretty worthless until, like, God, you know, like 9 months, maybe. No, not even. Like a year. I mean, my kid couldn't even watch this. She was 15 months. She's just, I think she's kind of lazy, but that was the thing. But the reason why that is that we almost had to have our children more prematurely, because the heads are so large. If they were gestating longer, they wouldn't fit through our hips, and then they, you know, the baby would die and the mother would die. So that's why our children are so worthless. they're so feeble. It's because that there's not an ability there to push that through. Okay, so the acetabulum is actually the hole here that the femur will insert into. The foramen arbiter. So if you remember, foramen is a hole. That's this thing here. That's this hole. And the coccyx. Oh, sacrum and coccyx. So here's the sacrum I was talking about before, right? Technically, that's part of the vertebrae. And the coccyx is this little part here. All right. So some things with this. The best way to kind of look at it is to look at it like a box like this, with kind of a hole in it. So if you try to visualize this shape when you're looking at hips. Honestly, it's a really complicated, oddly shaped thingamajigger that if I were you, what I would do is like just draw it a bunch and try to draw it inside of a figure. So like do a drawing of a nudish figure, or at least a form-fitting clothed person, and then afterwards see if you can figure out how the hips would draw in there. Now you're lucky because we have these interactive 3D things, so you could utilize this or maybe a better one. I kind of don't like these. I thought these were good at first because they had so many, but now I'm like, maybe I should have chose different ones. Yeah, so it's kind of a complicated form. Also be aware that most of the actions are driven from the hips. You know, if you go into walk or run or the hips direct motion generally, okay? And when we rig characters, this will be our root. It will be where the hips are. So it's important to understand where they are in the body when possible. The shoulder girdle. So basically the shoulder girdle is this here. Let me turn this on. I made it so you turn it on because if these all loaded up in the beginning, it'd probably make this really slow, and you know. But you can look at these yourself while I'm talking at you. Basically, the shoulder girdle is the apparatus that it's the the scapula and the clavicle, okay? And in combination, I guess, kind of with the humerus. But it's really these two parts. It's the two parts that support the humerus, okay? So the clavicle is obviously this back part. You notice it's kind of a triangular shape, and it slides around the spine, or not the spine, the rib cage. And then the scapula, or I'm sorry, I said the scapula, right? Yeah. And this is the clavicle. So the clavicle, a lot of times people get this kind of wrong. They'll like draw it like it's straight. It's actually more like handlebars. See how it kind of goes up, almost like an S? All right. The clavicle is your collarbone. So it attaches here, and then it attaches to the manubrium of your sternum, okay? So on this guy here, we have the Acromion process and the Caracoid process, and then that's these two guys here, and then the Glenoid Fossa, which is, let's see if I can get a little closer here. I hate these stupid things. It's this little area in here. It's basically it's not a true like it's not like the acetabulum where it has like a big hole that it fits into. It's actually a little bit softer, almost flat. But that's why you have such a large range of motion in your shoulder. But you have a large range of shoulder, but also it doesn't have to support a lot of weight, so it's not a big deal. The leg supports the whole body, right? So it allows for more flexibility and that sort of, which also, but you know, it would be stressed over long periods of time. So anyway, so some things with the shoulder girdle. It's not part of an axial skeleton, I said before. Okay, so I like to draw it like this, like almost like it's like a coffee cup, like a circle. Because if you look from the top, you can see how you could sort of think of it. See how it's kind of round, right? So I kind of think of it something like that, and that sits on top, and then that would make the front of it here of my cup. If it went around like this, that would be where my pectorals are, right? And then the scapula kind of would form the back part, and the clavicle would be the top of it, and the clavicle would also be the top of it. And I try to picture it like that, and then it would flex around based off of those two things. But I try to draw almost like a circle above. I don't know. I find that helps. All right, so now it's the appendicular skeleton. Let's try and go through this because this is already half an hour. All right, so the appendicular skeleton basically is your arms and legs. So on the arm here, we have the humeral head. That's just, or this is the humerus, sorry. So the humeral head is the part that inserts into that glenoid fossa. Okay, or originates. I guess it depends on how you say inserts. The surgical neck is the long part. And I'm not going to go through all these. Honestly, that doesn't really, it's not going to matter too much to you. The ulna is the part that bends here. So that's the back one here. That's the ulna. The radius is the one that rotates around the ulna. Allows you to have a rolling axis. Yeah. The main thing I would suggest here with this is that just to make sure that you can see a straight line in your arm. A lot of times people will make their arms kind of round, and that's obviously not something that you're looking for. Although there's no perfect straights in the arms or in any part of the body, if you try to think of a strong foundational straight, it'll still help you know, make sure that there's a stability there. So the carpals are basically these guys up in here, right? It's all these gobbledygooks. There's like a million of them. I don't remember how many there are, like 9 or 12 or something. It's all of these in here. Really isn't all that much to know. Metacarpals are the long part. So that would make up the palm of your hand is basically your metacarpals. And then your phalanges are your fingers. Phalanges are also what you call your toes. The main thing I would say here is do not, I guess I will turn this on because I want to show you something with it. Don't draw them as sausages, your fingers and your hands. Draw them as planes. If you actually look, you can hold your hand up. Wow, this is actually a terrible, I thought this was going to be better. So they did this completely wrong. But if you hold your hand up to your head, your face, and hold your fingers towards you, you'll notice that your fingers are actually, they're almost more squarish, and they're more flat at the top and the bottom, and more round on the sides. So you're better thinking of them as planes and not as sausages. That'd be my main thing there. So the leg, you have the femur, that's this big guy here, and then you have the tibia and fibula. So the tibia is the bigger part of the lower leg. That's this guy here. That's when you hit your shin. That's your tibia, okay? And your fibula is the smaller one. So typically when people break like a leg bone, it's often this guy because you'll see up here, he's pretty thin, or she's pretty thin. I don't know what gender my leg is here, but you can see it's pretty thin. But also notice that it's basically the same design as the upper arm, right? So the upper arm, we have the humerus, and then we have the ulna, and we have the radius, and basically the same thing here. And you're going to notice that when you see other animals, they have the exact same structure as well. So later on we'll do comparative anatomy, but you'll see that it's on all of them. Okay. The main thing I would say here is just to make sure you show the knee. Oh, I didn't put patella. Oh, I did put patella. Okay. Patella is the kneecap, which I don't think they even put in here. Eat back that thing up. Screw it. Okay. Patella is the knee bone here. Notice that it's not a round circle. It's actually kind of more triangular. What you also notice is that if you look at a knee, you'll see that the knee is not round. It has a triangular shape. It's partly because of the patella is a little bit oblong, but also because of the tibial tuberosity. So if you feel under your kneecap, there's a bump on your tibia, and you'll notice your tibia is very triangular. This little bump here is called the tibial tuberosity, and basically it's where there's muscle attachment, tendons. And basically what that'll do is it bulges out, so it creates more of a triangular knee shape. All right. Then you have your lateral and medial malleolus. Those are basically the knuckles. So this would be the medial malleolus. This is the lateral malleolus. I think I do want to show, let's see if it's here. Okay. It creates a sort of saddle on the bottom here. So what you'll notice is this one will kind of go on this side of it, and then this one will go on that side of it. Actually, I think I do the feet down here. So here we go. So then you have the talus, calcaneus, and tarsals. Okay, so the talus is this part here. It's like the saddle-y part. It's the part that the malleoli are going to be on either side of. Notice how they're off-angled here, and they're off-angled here. So this is the talus. Okay, that's the part it's going to rest on. This is the calcaneus. Okay. So your calcaneal tendon will come off of that. You can kind of see it here. So this is basically how the joint sort of works. And that's why you have some flexion rotating, but not a lot. It's mostly an up and down. It's not really a hinge, but it's close to that. All right, and then we're going to call that good for anatomy. Sorry, it's a long video. Next, what we'll do in class is we'll cover this stuff. All right, so go team.